Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're coming in from. We're going to give folks our usual 3 minutes to join the webinar. So just hang tight with us. Thank you. I made a mistake. I'm starting now. Sorry. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon to you. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to give folks a few minutes to join us in the room, and then we'll get started. So once again, thank you for being here. Once again, hello, good afternoon, good morning. Just giving folks another minute to join us and we'll get started promptly after that. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. These are the longest 3 minutes. All right. Welcome to NCST's July Community Impact Briefing. My name is Raquel Reddy, Vice President of Community Development here at NCST. I'm joined by my colleagues Kristopher Garland and Emmy McClintock, and we have the pleasure of having our friends from LISC Jacksonville, both Kristopher Smith and John Sapora, here to talk about Beyond the Deed, a toolkit for local interventions for the heirs property crisis. And so I'm going to do a full introduction for on both Kristopher and John in terms of their background, but just want to make sure folks are here for the right session. As we know that through the research of both Rebecca Dobbs and Cassandra Johnson Gaither, there's estimated to be more than 444,000 heirs property parcels spanning 9.2 million acres and representing approximately $41 billion in market value. That's B as in billion, that exists across the United States. And we all know that these properties often lack clear legal title, which creates barriers that can lead to probate disputes, forced sales, limited access to financing, and the erosion of generational wealth. And so, if you're here for that conversation, thank you for joining us. And during this briefing, we have, as I mentioned, our friends and colleagues, Kristopher Smith and John Sapora with LISC Jacksonville, who will be examining the scope of the heirs property challenge, its impact on families and communities, and the practical strategies for preserving homeownership. They're also going to highlight how LISC Jacksonville's heirs property toolkit is equipping organizations and communities with resources for education, outreach, and intervention to help families resolve title issues, retain ownership, access to capital financing, and protecting the equity that they have built over generations. So with that, I will like to introduce Kristopher Smith and John Sapora. Kristopher, I'll start with you. You are the LISC National Heirs Practice Lead and Senior Community Development Program Officer based in Jacksonville, Florida. where you co-lead heirs prevention and wealth preservation initiatives that advance estate planning uptake and anti-displacement efforts. Kristopher facilitates collaborative work with local governments, CDFIs, GSEs, government-sponsored entities, and philanthropic partners to scale capital plus service models that safeguard assets, stabilize neighborhoods, and also unlocks generational wealth. Kristopher holds a Master of Arts in Public Administration from the Nova Southeastern University, a Bachelor of Arts in Public Science from Bethune-Cookman University, and a certification in entrepreneurship education from Babson College. John Sapora joined LISC Jacksonville in 2019 as their Senior Housing Resiliency Program Officer, where he promotes neighborhood-based interventions that helps residents in formerly redline neighborhoods build family wealth through homeownership, including legal assistance to address heirs property, appraisal devaluations, and a home repair collaborative that integrates energy efficiency and weatherization to promote health, cost savings, and storm resiliency. John's previous experience includes working as a tenant intake attorney at Jacksonville Area Legal Aid and 16 years as National Legal Counsel for the First Tee Youth Development Program. John also practiced real estate and finance law in Jacksonville and continues to advise faith communities and nonprofit organizations. John has a Doctor degree from the University of Florida, the Levin School of Law, a Master of Divinity degree from Yale Divinity School, and a BA in History from the University of Illinois. Thank you both for being here. We're so excited about this conversation. And with that, we're going to go ahead and hand it over to you, Kristopher Smith. But just before I do that, please know that we are recording this webinar. We're also going to make the presentation available to you within about 24 hours on our website, and we'll put all that information in the chat. We're going to be taking Q&A in both. We're going to be taking your questions in both the Q&A feature and the chat feature at the end of the presentation. So please make note of your questions there. So with that, Kristopher Smith, I'll pass it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Raquel. And glad to be with y'all today. And Raquel, since I'm driving PowerPoint today, if you wouldn't mind just giving me a verbal yes, you can see my screen, and that way I'll know I'm good to go.
Absolutely.
All right. So it's good to be with y'all, as I mentioned. And
Kristopher, you just want to put in a presentation mode real quick.
My apologies. I thought we had this ready to go. Let's see here. Try this again.
Yeah, no worries.
Are you able to see it now?
Not yet.
One more time.
Looks like it's coming.
There we go.
There we go. Yeah.
Okay, we're good?
Yes, we are. Thank you so much. Okay.
Sorry about the delay, folks. So we've got the title. John and I are going to quickly run through our sort of take on this important topic and give you a sense of sort of a bird's eye view, and then some practical tools and some insight from what we have seen over the past 3 to 4 years around this topic. So first, sort of stepping back, many of you may have seen this, but the circles represent likely heirs concentration across the country. This is particularly as it relates to urban and suburban markets. It does not fully account for rural markets or vacant heirs properties. Nonetheless, as you can see, this is a significant issue in every state, and conservative estimates put the home value at north of $600 billion. That's with a B, $1 billion in sort of assets that are on the sidelines, unavailable to be financed, insured, or accessible to households because of this issue of clouded title. And so the nature of the challenge does differ depending on the kind of market you're in, but nonetheless, the point here is it's an urban, suburban, and rural challenge. It, in a lot of ways, is an invisible challenge and barrier for folks who are unable to access the formal finance and housing markets. And so the headline essentially is our work is to keep homes in the family. We're trying to keep these homes in the family while we help grow generational wealth. And so one of the challenges that comes with this idea, and we'll get into specifics as we go, is the overlapping nature of systems and this issue. And one of them is the tax system. And so in Florida, where we're located in Duval County, we're seeing significant overlap between the property tax system and the heirship households. And what I mean by that is 1 out of every 4 properties that show up for property tax auction are likely heirs households. And so you can see that that creates a significant stress on heirs households who may be unable to manage the property tax arrears, but who would like to remain in the home. And so one of the things I'd mentioned to you is pay attention to, if you're not already, the property tax auction market, your property tax certificate markets, because it could give you signal as to the level of stress or risk in your markets, in particular as it relates to identifying likely heirs households. Here's in the LISC world, and I should stop and give you the 15-second commercial. LISC, as a national intermediary, is in over 34 markets, including rural spaces. Our work is primarily driving capital and opportunity in markets and places that have experienced neither. And so for the work we're talking about today around heirs, the dots represent markets that are taking on the heirs work. In Florida, to your right, you'll notice the counties that are involved, and that's Tampa, Palm Beach, Jacksonville, of course. But this issue, as I mentioned, is affecting most of the markets around the country, most urban markets around the country, and is a significant legacy issue in rural markets. And frankly, we're learning from some of the lessons that stakeholders have gleaned over time in the rural space and seeing what is adaptable to our work in urban settings. This is just to give you a sense of strategy. I won't read it all, but the basic point here is we're trying to use data to generate signal or smoke, and smoke give us a sense of a smoke detector, okay? And that then helps us deploy and design interventions. And we're trying to do that in a real-time way so that the right intervention reaches the right household at the right moment. Another thought to consider that we've understood over time is this is a group effort. This is a team job. So the octopus represents the various partners that we've been able to work with in our local ecosystem to help address this issue. This is a layered issue. It's affected in terms of the legal side of things, obviously with legal partners, legal aid. It depends on, and the underpinning of the success of this work is trust. And so navigators who could be community health workers, these could be community navigators. These are folks who are trusted, embedded messengers in community that folks will listen to and take interest in the message that's being delivered. Data, I've already mentioned, is critically important, and policy is the ultimate game here, is we need to think about what policies can help drive system change. This is not about a particular case or cases. This is about neighborhood change and system change ultimately. This is what that octopus looks like in Jacksonville. So here you got these different systems and different representative fields. And in this picture are all of those fields represented, whether it's legal, community, local government. You've got housing, counseling represented there, data, all of the key players, people who have been impacted by the issue are also in this picture, who are all able to inform and help us improve and adapt as conditions on the ground warrant. This gives you a sense of how we've been able to track change. So I call your attention to the blue dotted line. So resolved HPs essentially are where we have identified a household who is in need of probate and who's been able to get title resolution completed. That plus estate plans, which is the prevention side. So remember, there are basically two lanes to this work that are primary. One is keeping people out of tangled title, and that is prevention interventions like estate planning and like housing counseling. That's the one way you can resolve and get in on the front end. The other, frankly, is title resolution. The house is on fire. We've got to address the probate issue. And then working with legal partners to get that done. That blue line indicates that we've resolved more cases than were created in 2023. That trend has continued in 24 and 25. As you know, heirs property as a non-lawyer is essentially when a property is inherited by folks who do not have clear title to the home. They are living in an informal ownership status without the formal ownership rights. They're unable to finance the property. They're unable to, in many cases, insure the property. Okay, at this point, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, John, who can chime in with some additional comments. John?
All right, good afternoon, everyone. John Sapora. I put in the chat a link to our website, which has links to our various tools and information that we've accumulated and produced over the years that we've worked on this. And so now I wanted to talk about some case study examples of how heirs property and our homeownership preservation work integrates into different neighborhoods and their priorities. And so the first one is the historic east side of Jacksonville is an African American neighborhood that it has rich culture and history, but it's under a lot of pressure. It's near the NFL Jaguars Stadium, a new soccer stadium that's being built. It's a wonderful neighborhood that's been really underinvested for years, but the neighborhood-based organizations are really focusing on uh, really a holistic uh, uh, attempt to address the gentrification pressures. And so our heirs property work is all about homeownership preservation. I was personally involved with the homeowner, the home repair work that you see here. The United Way, other local partners have really been active. And so it's a good example. There's a home repair program, and some of those applicants don't own clear title to the home. So we have created a very good referral process to our legal aid partner that will really help those folks get back in line for home repairs. You can go to the next slide. Is the Emerald Trail in Jacksonville. Believe it or not, we have a 30-mile trail with two beautiful creeks that are being daylighted all through the urban core. It's about a 10-year process that's already started, and so in 14 neighborhoods. So you can imagine the tremendous pressures on these low to moderate income neighborhoods that have been quiet but are under intense pressure from investors. And so we talk a lot about gentrification. And so the work that we're doing alongside Groundwork Jacksonville and the city in doing this trail is really about helping people stay in their homes um, while there's change around them. There's plenty of property that's available for new investment, but we want to keep the history and the culture and the identity of the people that are living in these neighborhoods so they can enjoy the trail as well. You can go to the next slide. The third example is what we really think is our only middle neighborhood in Jacksonville. It's an old African American neighborhood that has just an amazing Ribault River running through it. We have the St. Johns River running through Jacksonville and some amazing tributaries. So this beautiful river runs through this neighborhood, but a lot of people don't use the river. So we work with the St. Johns River Keeper to help to bring people to enjoy the river as an amenity more, and also to help restore some of the parks and the boat ramps along the creek. Um, and this is a good example of our data partner, Project Guardian, that we have helped them to develop a dashboard that really assesses multiple risks, overlapping risks. Um, this is a flood-prone area, and also a heat risk. And so these dots represent heirs properties that need clearing title. We need to invest in resilience and supporting residents. The city has done a septic to sewer conversion in this neighborhood, but a lot of those homeowners don't own clear title, so they can't sign off on the septic to sewer conversion. So that's another subtlety about heirs property and how that can really impact neighborhood redevelopment. The final thing I wanted to mention, which is not on the slide, is besides the property tax issues that come up with heirs property, we're also looking at financing solutions. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation has given us a grant. If you can imagine a bank or a credit union, are they going to loan money to a resident heir who has not gone through probate to prove their legal ownership yet? And even then, the heir only owns a fractional interest in the home, and they've likely never had a mortgage loan, and they have little or no credit history. So imagine. Well, we have discovered that even the well-meaning financial institutions that work in these lower income neighborhoods regularly are not interested in lending money at that point in time. So we're trying to invent financing solutions that really help heirs. And I think what we found in our work in the inheritance process and the property tax system and the financing system, the heirs are just not considered in these systems. And so that's really the broader point of our work, is to see how we can really help heirs be more considered and get the opportunities that uh, other landowners have.
Thank you both for your presentation. And, as we talked about earlier, this is a dynamic conversation, one that needs to be had in many different places. We have an opportunity now to sort of, speak to our audience and ask if you have certain questions. I know there's one that's come in the chat, Chris, if you want to introduce that, and I'll continue to look in the Q&A. Go ahead.
Oh, most certainly. And just to reiterate, I know there was also interest. We are recording today's presentation, and so that'll be posted to our website within 24 hours at ncst.org/videos. So that first question that Raquel mentioned from Andrea Sola, first off, thanks again for today's presentation. You may be planning on discussing this in some of your remarks, but do you have resources to help mitigate the impacts of Medicaid estate recovery on lower income estates?
I mean, I would say that our legal aid partners are the ones that really deal with the residents on that issue. That is a factor, absolutely, as they help probate estates or do estate planning, prevention. So I would talk to your legal aid partners about that question in your particular state.
Thanks for that, John. Raquel, I'll go ahead and take this next question also. Can you speak to any experience using land trusts in this process, perhaps as a tool for affordability and long-term affordability? I think the question is driving at perhaps an intersection between heirs property resolution and integrating community land trusts.
In the state of Florida, we don't have land trusts. We have community land trusts. We don't have land banks. So a lot of states have land banks, which I think create sort of a legal framework that can really help recover and preserve property. So I would look at your land banks in your state. We have talked with land banks that have some very creative programs that that do try to help heirs um, preserve their property and and clear title, and then actually restore title back to the landowner. There's a great program in Savannah, Georgia, on that as well.
Yeah, Chris, I think Center for Community Progress has looked into this a little bit, where there's again overlapping systems. So the land bank, land trust system. I know the folks in Louisville are looking at this. Folks up in Kentucky in Battle Creek and their land bank systems look at, and Savannah Land Bank is one of the leading folks. And Houston, I think it's the Fifth Ward CDC is also taking this on, where they've acquired property through, in some cases, property tax auctions, and they've intervened, bought the property, and then worked with the heir household to sell the property back to them at below market.
Thanks so much for that. And those are great organizations to point out in Houston, Louisville, and Savannah Chatham Land Bank, as you discussed. The organization, for folks that aren't familiar as well, that Kristopher mentioned, Center for Community Progress, something of an umbrella organization in the land bank community, certainly worth tapping into.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions. Oh, go ahead, Chris. I think you're going to guide us through the questions
Sure, I'm happy to continue along here. There was a question regarding the toolkit that was referenced. Is that something that's readily available for folks to access?
Yes, and I should preface that by saying the field is now generating more products. And so what we can do is share a few of those in the chat, a few of the links, and see for folks that are maybe new to the work or they've been in it for a while, you're going to find the product, look for the product that works best for you. Okay, but I would say there's no one size fits all because this issue is context driven. And so I'd encourage you to look through them and consider the community conditions in your market. But yeah, we could drive, John, a few of those to the chat right now.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. A question here from Candace Turner. How do you get participants to get involved? What's your marketing strategy? This might relate to some of that specific work you mentioned there in the Jacksonville community.
Well, you saw the photo of all the partners that we get together and we really strategize together. We really have trusted messengers in these different neighborhood organizations, or we have consultants that are individually really well connected in neighborhoods. So we've tried very different ways. It's not really marketing as much as it is really attending different events. One strategy is to be invited by a community organization that already has credibility in the neighborhood to be on their agenda, not to have standalone events about heirs property. You know, a lot of legal aids do that. They have legal clinics about a topic. But I think what we found is we go to the organizations and we just meet with people and we learn from them about their issues and we educate, but we learn from them and then provide a quick referral service. I think that's one of our secret sauces is that we have enough legal aid capacity to really address the referrals that are generated from these community outreach meetings.
Yeah, I would say a little different. I mean, so coming from a non-lawyer standpoint, we are marketing, okay? Because what we're trying to do is move from awareness to action. And so what we have introduced in some of the messaging is some behavioral science tools. So I'd encourage folks to think about it in terms of not only how do you make folks aware of the issue, but what will drive them to take one next best step today. And that could be signing up for a referral. It could be encouraging them to go back and have a conversation with family members about the topic. It could be taking the material and going and looking for family documents that would be necessary to understand the nature of the situation. But all of this, Chris and Raquel, is driving towards what can we do to drive people towards taking action? Okay, that is critically important. I put in the chat the estate planning toolkit. We had several folks help us with that, JPMC, Freddie, and others. And what we try to do is assemble some of these images, some of these slogans and messages that may relate to a particular demographic and share those. So customized, targeted messaging is also another thing to consider. The way I would talk to my mom, far different than the way I'm talking to my kid about this issue. And we have to meet people where they are. So I'll put in a couple other things in the chat, but I wanted to mention that it's a great question. It is start where people are. As John said, integrate the idea, layering this into existing things like housing counseling. So pre and post purchase counseling. That's another way. You can think about it, financial coaching. And how do you integrate this into helping people understand not just budget, but thinking about their future, thinking about their assets and how they may protect. So one of the key words I mentioned here is protect and care are two critically important ways in which you can get folks to understand how this translates. This complex legal issue translates into real world action.
And I'll also add that I think when we started, and I think in a lot of markets, you start with the really, challenging cases of people that have, numerous heirs and that they're about ready or they have lost title to their home, which is the resolution side of this. But really what we're focusing the most on to really move the needle, as you saw in our chart, is about estate planning prevention. So think of all those places, there's Habitat, there's the cities or counties that are doing housing programs. There are low to moderate income people that need to do estate plans. And so that's a great place to start. It's a great way to get your legal community involved because these resolution cases are very time consuming and very difficult to do. But it's the estate planning that we've really focused a lot of our time and energy on, and it's very effective to move the needle in a community.
That's really, really helpful context. And it certainly reminds me of an opening remark, Kristopher, that you had in your first slide or so around that idea of the underpinning being focused on, building trust. And so meeting folks, figuratively and also literally, as you're describing there, where they are on that point. Another question here: what are some ways that you work with CDFIs to address tangled titles?
Yeah, John, I think I'll defer to you on this one, since it's one part of this is the financing side. And so how do you help people? Let me say it this way. There's several pieces of this puzzle, Chris, that CDFIs can show up in. One is helping a local collaboration, a local partnership. They can support the infrastructure needed to actually get the word out and generate enough actions, enough completions in order to generate market confidence so that people will begin to seek out the legal and housing assistance they need. So CDFIs can show up in that way. Frankly, the other way is in their wheelhouse, which is what's the product market fit? What is the way in which you can help finance fractional ownership? And so that's something we're continuing to try to learn from. Our friends in New York have a product out on the street. But John, I know you want to maybe take that one and go a little further with it.
Well, yeah, some CDFIs like LISC actually were not licensed to do residential lending, but a lot of CDFIs at the local level are. So I think it's a challenge because even for them, they're regulated under typical regulations as far as, mortgages and needing to sell those mortgages upstream. But the Center for New York City Neighborhoods, Scott Kowanowski, is leading that effort. They are really the only entity that's actually loaning to heirs at that point in time before they have gotten their title cleared or even consolidated title. And I think that's an important thing to remember, that even if legal aid helps through probate, that still means that if there's 4 heirs, it means the probate court has just decided that each of those 4 heirs own 1/4 interest in the home. That's it. That doesn't mean it's consolidated. The court doesn't consolidate title for those heirs. The heirs are then left with ownership of that home. So what the financing opportunity is to help even the heirs that have already cleared title that way to get financing, to maybe repay for legal fees, to pay some back taxes, to do a little home repair, to buy out the other heir. So a resident heir could actually continue to own the home and then maybe ultimately be able to qualify for a more traditional mortgage. So I think we need to pilot some of these financing opportunities and then get financial institutions to really see their place in this mix. We need to get the financial institutions and all that capital off the sidelines to help these heirs.
Yeah, John's right. We got to think about I understand the underwriting is complicated, but we got to think about a creative way to align sort of underwriting and risk profiles with access to capital so that these households can become mortgage ready and financeable. And by the way, insurable. Another big challenge
Yeah.
is we're seeing upwards of 35% of likely heirs households are self-insured. They do not have insurance, and that in Florida creates an additional challenge given the sort of environmental risk that come particularly now during hurricane season.
That the properties are in the very places that are sometimes
Correct.
the most challenging to insure.
Correct. It's almost a double whammy. And so that last chart John was speaking to in that neighborhood of Reball with the dots, what you may not have picked up on was you could have climate risk overlapping with ownership risk and creating a heightened notion of vulnerability in a neighborhood that proximate to a waterway.
Okay, another question here. This one might be challenging to unpack, but I'll take some liberty with it. Initially, the question is, what's the average cost to untangle a title? And perhaps a different way of looking at that is if you give the audience some perspective, maybe a range on what's necessary in terms of that investment to untangle a title.
Well, the way we describe it is really the probate administration. That could be summary administration for older estates or the full administration. You know, legal aid prices and private attorney prices are different, and definitely they differ around the country. I think for us, our legal aid partner, the range could be from $2,000, which is a reimbursement we get from one funder, to much higher than that. It can be five to eight or $10,000 depending on the heirs that are involved and all the research that's done. It's not the court process as much as it is the research on the number of heirs, and even the financing a solution that we're working on is really to help heirs that have a manageable number of heirs. I mean, some of these cases are really absurd. I mean, the inheritance process really is not kind to heirs that don't promptly go through probate. On the estate planning side, it can be under $1,000 to get, a ladybird deed, a will if that's needed, healthcare directive, living will. So the estate planning is not just about the home; it's also about their healthcare. So I think that's a good range. But again, negotiating that with legal aid, our legal aid has other funding sources. You know, we've sort of created an engine with our legal aid. It's not like every grant is paying for just a certain number of cases. It's an engine. It's a pool of money that's flexible capital that they can use to deploy for different cases.
John, thanks for that. Question here. Is there a source where people can go to help with filing a claim if they have a preserved heirs interest in a property by having paid the mortgage, taxes, insurance of the deceased, such as the family would not lose that house?
I'm sorry, I didn't follow that one. If that's a legal question.
Sure. Happy to come back to that one as well. A question here. Are there things that that a county could implement, such as recordation alternatives or ways to document an heir as a primary responsible party, maybe for a limited term, in order to facilitate access to the programs?
Well, there are several states and advocates in those states that have uh, been very successful at getting the affidavits of heirship or other tools that can be used, especially in a disaster context. Florida is still not at the state level that advanced. So there's some flexibility at the local level, but I would say that those kind that's the way to really make some practical change quickly is to just loosen up, especially if you have funders. Talk to funders because I think the big assumption with, obviously with government funding, but non-government funding could be flexible as long as the funder knows that this could be heirs property and there's an affidavit of heirship. So I think that's the opportunity to be creative with your funding sources. There's a lot more room in the law than you might think because we have such a strong assumption about you have to have clear title for the people that are occupying the home to get any benefits whatsoever.
Yeah, I'm going to take another tack at this and say, I'm going to back up and look at the data and say, public records are messy. And that's being a former public and municipal city administrator. And so the challenge is how do you understand uh, what a household may be in a pre-distress level or status so that we can intervene before crisis. And so that brings me to the second point, which is there's no standard nomenclature across the country to identify heirs. I mean, just in Florida, we have 67 counties. You could have 67 different ways of having likely heirs households show up in the public record. And so some standardization of nomenclature for likely heirs households is needed. Secondarily, we need to think about a pre-distress category that helps practitioners understand when is the right moment to intervene or to make information available to the right households to help them avert home loss due to ownership risk.
Chris, it's such an important reminder. John, you opened your response there by speaking to the nuances particular to Florida, the implication being that that may not be the same in other states. And then building on Chris's point, right, that even within those states, there's individual counties and municipalities and the way that they're governed. It certainly is reminiscent of conversation that we had recently with Dr. Ryan Thompson for folks on the call that may have joined in on that. And as he dug in on the work studying the city of Birmingham, and the various ways that, as Chris, as you're describing, heirs could potentially be identified.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, Chris, what this is driving towards is what process can we design that people can realistically finish? That's what we need to be thinking about so that how we can identify them sooner, take the appropriate action, and they reach completion. How can we increase the level of confidence in that process? And what role might data and what role might public policy play in that?
Thank you for that. I'll try and lightning round a few more of these questions. I appreciate all of them that have been coming in. Question here from Peter Duvall. I'll abbreviate to say in a recent conversation, he with a particular individual, she was very concerned about potentially causing some conflict with her family and wanting to structure an arrangement with all of her children for that, and wondering if is there a way to get ahead of that kind of thing in advance.
Well, a lot of times our legal partners will really talk to family members, especially the client that's in the office, um, really to look hard at who of the heirs could best take care of a home and be able to manage the expenses and the maintenance. And that might take some time to cultivate that, especially if you're getting ahead of it with estate planning. Um, Doing a will and having all of the heirs or the children inherit the home just creates heirs property. I mean, So you have to be very careful, and so I think it's important. And there might be other assets that other heirs might get besides the home, but that's what I know our legal partners are trying to help clients do is to have one heir be the inheritor of the home.
Yeah, I mean, so from a behavioral science standpoint, Chris, real quick, there's a difference between being fair and being reasonable in terms of the assets that you would like to protect. If the idea is to have the asset available to the family in a way that they can do something with it, then it needs to go to one heir, and other assets can be divided among other heirs. But if you're trying to be fair, then what Peter's talking about is the way to go. It is have everybody on the deed and not create any conflict within family. But it's that conflict diversion that Chris gets in the way of making the better decision about the disposition of that asset.
Such a helpful reminder. Thank you for that context. And then, Raquel, I could be wrong. I think I'm seeing one other question, noting actually that this individual is an heir herself, an heir to a property in Mississippi that was left by my grandfather. It was passed to my father and siblings, and now to her generation. Do we need to go to probate to own this property? Is the question.
Well, it's not enough information to really know the answer for sure, but I definitely think getting legal counsel to help with that. But yes, some kind of legal process that vests title in the heirs, uh, and then being able to create some kind of ownership, and it could be family ownership in an LLC or some kind of corporate ownership. If it's land, that's an often an answer for non-homes property. Um, then the family can sort out responsibilities and rights within a company context. But it's really important to get the ownership of record into an individual that's alive, or into an entity that can operate that property.
Thanks so much for that. Raquel, were there any others that we needed to cover?
Yeah, no, nothing more on that front. So I think we're good. I'm just doing another quick check. Yeah, I think we're some comments there. Yeah, I think we're good there. And it's been such a dynamic conversation. You know what? There may be one more here. One second. Let me see. It's from Johnny Laurie. Is there an existing strategy for staying harmful fracturing of property interests as you work on the lending and financing side of things to encourage creative financing? Such a strategy would entail working with existing heirs. They have a right to their own solutions. Is there an existing strategy for staying harmful fracturing of property interest? Chris, I'm
Well, I
not
think
sure if I'm
well, I think part of the
in.
answer there is that uh, these heirs own, as what's called tenants in common.
Mhm.
So they each own a fractional interest of the entire property, and so there are tenants in common agreements that could help manage the relationship, to identify the heirs, to identify the rights and responsibilities, because frankly, all of those co-owners have a responsibility to keep up the property. Believe it or not, a lot of heirs, they might live in Ohio, but there's the homestead in Florida. Legally speaking, they have an obligation to help pay the taxes. So that's part of the dynamic, is to help educate heirs and to get them in the same room, ideally, to help sort out who's most responsible, who's able to take care of the property, who wants to live on the property, or sell the property. So that's probably part of the answer. I'm not sure of what else I can say on
No,
that.
John, that's really helpful, and actually a somewhat related question, speaking to the dynamic of properties that have an existing mortgage. and having co-borrowers, and of course, over time, following a death, you're left with that circumstances of who then is covering the balance of that mortgage and how to equally distribute that.
Well, that's right. A mortgage is a big issue for the heirs because the heirs really need to get the lender to give them permission to even talk to the lender officially about the property and about paying the mortgage. Some lenders there's a there's a provision in the mortgage that says if the borrowers have died, then the mortgage comes due. And some lenders don't really want to talk to the heirs. They just want to foreclose the property or just call the entire debt due first. So it's a big issue. And a lot of legal aids actually have addressed the heirs property issue through the foreclosure defense cases that they have. That's how legal aids have often found the heirs case. They don't go out and look for the heirs cases, but they find them with these foreclosure cases. So that's another intersection that that is something to address with the populations that we're working with.
Yeah, where we're coming into now is the tax foreclosure system, Chris. So where CDFIs can play a role, we can help finance um, redeeming tax liens, okay, and do that to help avert the tax foreclosure, property not going on the courthouse steps and being sold at auction. So to the extent that we can help heirs avoid that, then that's another way CDFIs can play a role.
Yeah. Chris, just quickly, I wanted to go back to a comment that John was just talking about in the question that came into the Q&A. So this individual says they're struggling with the death of a co-borrower and allowing the other borrower to maintain the mortgage. Any advice? John, you were saying that some lenders, because it's written in, um, the loan agreement that or the mortgage that they can take it straight to foreclosure. Any advice here? I mean, reaching out to the lenders, is that, going to help or make any difference?
Well, I think it helps a lot. Now, if it's truly a co-borrower, then that other borrower could still have standing, and the mortgage would not be in default automatically just because another borrower is deceased. But again, looking at the mortgage document and always recommend talking to the mortgage company and not just letting this go, because that's what happens a lot of times is that the heirs, they might make the payments, they might continue to make the mortgage payments, but then once the lender finds out that the owners are deceased and the borrowers are deceased, then it becomes an issue. So it's good to talk to the mortgage company. The question from Nancy, I think, is a really important one for Kristopher and I to talk about. Do you see a national movement on the part of foundations, government agencies supporting these efforts as a panacea to stabilizing development, or is it for families? And I'll just say, and then Kristopher, he's our national lead. I do think we're finding a lot of attention because this issue is a major cause of our chronic affordable housing crisis in this country and the persistent wealth gaps in America. So we have touched on something, and I do think that major sponsors are much more engaged than they used to be.
Yeah. I mean, I think the idea that, listen, we're not going to build our way out of the housing crisis, that we still need production alongside we need preservation. And this is a viable, low cost intervention in the preservation space that has been under utilized. And now maybe a moment, given the great wealth transfer and the moment we're in terms of the macro environment, this is an opportunity now to help stave off home loss. And also, Chris and Raquel, reduce the amount of wealth leakage. We need to reimagine the kind of metrics that help us determine success. And to the extent that we can help avert home loss, we can protect equity gains, and we can help with post-transfer stabilization, help people keep homes, then that is absolutely going to help us in this sort of national movement.
Well said, Chris. I think let's see, we've got time for probably one or two more questions. I will say, There was one that came in. Uh, okay, maybe we already answered it.
Well,
I'm
I'll
sorry for that.
mention, Raquel, just a practical thing. If someone like a nonprofit wants to do something in where they are right now, there's probably two or three questions to ask. One, if you're interfacing with clients and people just in normal way of practice, first is the question of, do you know who's on the deed, who's on the title?
Mhm.
And then the second is, whoever that is, do they have a plan? And so our goal is to reduce the number of folks who leave us without a plan. And if we can do that, that small step can help, again, address the wealth leakage. It can help generate intergenerational wealth transfer, and accumulate and continue to build on equity gains at the neighborhood and parcel level.
Chris, thanks for that. I will try and throw this last question or another question in the mix here. The question is this: what happens if an heir chooses to stay in the home? Wealth isn't really being passed down to the family, but rather just that one individual. That may be more of an opinion than a fact, but I'm wondering what your reaction or perspective is on that.
Well, I mean, the wealth is embedded in that home. Over time, if they become eligible for more traditional lending, they could get a home equity loan. I know that Fannie Mae has adjusted their selling guidelines to consider heirs. Of the limited cash out refinancing guidelines allow the payment of title clearance costs and back taxes and home repairs to be folded in. So I think there's an opportunity to use the wealth that's embedded in the home. And I mean, a home is a launching point for people to run businesses, to raise families. There's just so many ways that this stable home ownership helps build wealth for that entire family.
Yeah, and Chris, I'll mention I saw another question there about what can local government do. I'll just quickly say a couple things come to mind. One, look at your existing housing assistance programs. Consider broadening eligibility criteria to include likely heirs, and to include heirs that are living in homes that they would like to remain in and become their primary homestead. That would be one. Second, and this is something that still we're figuring out, is consider in relation to housing assistance, how might DPA programs relate to heirs, likely heirs households? Can likely heirs become eligible for DPA upon the completion of a legal transfer of ownership? So legal transfer of ownership is what I'm encouraging local government to consider as a trigger for access to housing assistance programs. Okay. And then the last thing is to say, fund your housing and counseling programs so that they can do heirs counseling. They can generate referrals to legal aids and legal partners so we can help more people faster.
Chris, I don't know that I've ever been on a call with you where you haven't wrapped up with that important reminder.
Perfect. Well, we are just at enough time to have our colleague Emmy McClintock join us. So thank you, Christopher and John, for an amazing conversation. There are a few more questions out there. We're going to help to get you answers even after this webinar, but I'd like to invite Emmy to join in and share some updates on our policy side.
Yes, thank you, Raquel. And thank you, Christopher and John, for such a great presentation. I think it's such a complex topic that really does deserve a platform of its own and more conversation like this. So I know I really enjoyed it. But with that being said, I'm excited to share a couple of policy updates. The most notable one being that the Road to Housing Act has now officially become law. So for those of you who don't know, the Road to Housing Act is a landmark housing reform package focused on addressing housing supply challenges, improving affordability, and ultimately just expanding pathways to homeownership. And this officially became law on July 11th after it passed both chambers and also completed the constitutional review period without a presidential veto while Congress remained in session. So, this is a product of years worth of work from, a lot of practitioners, a lot of local nonprofits, a lot of housing stakeholders, and a lot of input from you all. So, it's certainly reason to celebrate. And the work is far from over. I think we're entering a big period of implementation. So you can expect to hear the conversation continue around that. Otherwise, I'll leave it at this. As always, if you're interested in becoming a member of our Homeownership Alliance, we're always looking for new members, so please feel free to reach out to Raquel, Chris, or myself. We'd be more than happy to connect, and it really is such an exciting time to be a part of this conversation. So I'll leave it at that. And Raquel, you can go ahead and close this out. Oh, you're on mute.
I was just saying, what an amazing way to end our July Community Impact Briefing. Thank you all so much. We do have August, we don't meet, so we'll see you back in September, but thank you all for being here. Give us about 24 hours, we'll get everything up on our website, and we really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you again, John, Kristopher, Emmy, Chris. Thanks. Take care.